dagens överläggningar. Det kommer gå till så här. Vi har 3 talare med oss idag från SaFe. Och talarna är i tur och ordning Karin Karlsson-Kanyama, som kommer att inleda ungefär 10 minuter. Berätta hur det ligger till, presentera organisationen. Hon kommer följas upp av Elisabeth Katja Susanna, som kommer att prata om Karin berättar om organisationen förresten, och Elisabeth kommer att prata om Black Feminism. Och slutligen så kommer även Victoria Kawesa att prata om intersektionalitet. Så att 3 viktiga ben för oss att hugga in på när vi går in sen i den påföljande diskussionen som vi alltid har efter pausen. Och det blir en chans för er att ställa era frågor och komma med era kommentarer och andra typer av bidrag till den här diskussionen. Så vi kommer nog hålla på till en ganska god bit efter 8, tror jag, med det här samtalet. Så varmt välkomna ska ni vara, och så skulle jag vilja be Karin att komma upp först.
Ja, hej allihopa. Jag tänkte också säga det att vi kommer ha en på engelska. Och den kommer vara på engelska, men självklart så kommer det okej att diskutera och ställa frågor på svenska också. Vi kan allihopa svenska också, men på grund av att vissa personer som kommer tala mer bekvämt på engelska så hålls den här interpretationen på engelska.
Och får jag fråga, är det någon i publiken som tycker att vi ska använda mikrofonen, eller är det bra så här som det är?
Någon som inte hör?
Ja, det kan vara bra, tror jag.
Okej. Okej. Som sagt, den här organisationen, eller vår organisation, grundades i januari det här året. Och den heter SaFe, men kallas också Svart Feministiskt Forum, på engelska Black Feminist Forum. Och det var alltså den svenska biten, vi kommer fortsätta på engelska nu. Den här organisationen we were founded from a common interest in black feminism and a need for black feminism to emerge within the political landscape. I was planning to begin to talk about the structure of this seminar, but since Katimba already told you about how the seminar will be structured, I will go on to talk about other points relating to what will be talked about later on. All right. And as I said, we have a discussion also after Victoria has spoken, and then you will also be able to participate and ask questions. All right, this is an image that I think that everyone has seen and been enraged by. So have we in SaFe. We've seen this image, we've followed the discussion afterwards, and we've all, I think, been able to see this as an act of racism. It's an image of a black woman portrayed as a traditional blackface, and the discussion that has been occurring afterwards has been largely about racism, and the racism that this image portrays, the fact that the minister in Sweden is sanctioning this image, and the fact that it's a really political event that has led many black people and African people to organize as well. What we have found, we who have started SaFe, is that in this discussion, a feminist perspective has been lacking. This discussion is really, we think that this image of the black woman portrayed not only as a blackface, but also very, very sexualized, shows that race and sex intersects. So that the issue of racism from a black feminist perspective has to be seen in relation to the issue of sexism. The black female body faces a specific form of oppression that can't be isolated, that can't be put in the same category as that of black males, and that is one of the reasons why we have decided to organize. Also, you might remember the incident of Lilla Hjärtat, that incident that also triggered a massive reaction and probably mobilized many of you as well. And this issue is also, you can see the image here, also shows a black girl, also portrayed as a traditional black face. There are dimensions to this picture that also captures sexist imagery. This girl is portrayed also as a stereotypical female, and the features on her, such as the fact that she is portrayed as feminine, also shows the intersection of racism and sexism. So I wanted to show you these pictures because they symbolize the issues that we are organizing about. And these are also issues that Victoria and Elisabetta will be talking more about further on in the presentation. But I want to give you an initial standpoint about where we come from when we say that racism and sexism are intrinsically interrelated. This is one of the reasons that we organized. Another reason to why we have organized is because we all come from a background of working within anti-racist organizations ourselves. And also what we have found within our work in anti-racist organizations is that a black feminist voice is not being taken seriously enough. When we have worked within organizations, many of us, our experience has been that that these organizations do not entirely function as a platform for black feminism, for a black feminist voice, and we have found that there is a need for us to organize by ourselves in order for us to put the issues on the agenda that we want to emphasize. So these are two of the main reasons as to why we have come to organize. It might be self-evident, at least it is to me, that we black women make up about 50%, half of black people worldwide. So if you're talking about black liberation and the emancipation of black people, we have to acknowledge that that emancipation will not occur unless black women are emancipated as well. So this is also a central standpoint, that feminism, as we talk about it, has everything to do with black liberation in general. These are not two separated issues. This is of relevance not only to black women, but also to black men. Another point that should be emphasized is that when we talk about black feminism is not something new. We're not inventing this. It's a tradition that has been going on for a long time among black women. In Sweden, this issue is not new. There are individuals who have been working for black women, but what also has to be said that there is no organized effort to address black feminism. Our organization, SaFe, is the first initiative in Sweden to address black feminism. We want to be that first platform in order to forward and encourage the emancipation of black women in Sweden. Finally, I want to just say something, this quote from Audre Lorde, who is a classic. She's a prominent black feminism from the United States. She said, "Black women have particular issues which affect our lives as black women, and addressing those issues does not make us any less black." She said this against the background because when black women organized separately in the United States, they were seen as selling out to the black civil rights movement. And this is a critique that we have to give to our own community, to say that addressing these issues that does not mean that we are not in solidarity with the black struggle at large. it's an issue that is still very contentious within the Black movement, and even to this day, Black feminists faces this kind of critique. So, what are the aims and goals of SaFe, this organization that we have created now? In general, I could say that it's to strengthen the current efforts of the Black liberation struggle in this country by encouraging all of the talents and creativities of Black women to emerge. Concretely, this we plan to do by spreading awareness to young Black women about the repression and how to resist it, our oppression, I should say. Media watch projects, for us to conduct media watch projects where Black feminists monitor the press and call out racist and sexist attacks on Black women. It's important for us to call out these attacks ourselves rather than anyone else to call them out for us. That is a very crucial part of our empowerment, to own these issues. Also, we are aiming to mobilize collection action in case of discrimination and racism. This is also another aspect of ownership. In order for us to, when we face discrimination and racism, that we are the ones talking and resisting this acts of discrimination publicly, and not somebody who's not affected themselves. Also, another issue that we think is really important is partnerships with anti-racist and feminist organizations. Both anti-racist organizations at large, but also other feminist organizations, such as white feminist organizations or feminist organizations that aren't necessarily directed towards Black women. We believe that we have to have solidarity with other people who are working against sexism and racism in order for us to successfully be able to resist these oppressions. Okay, that's what I want to say. I want to give the word to Elisabete, who will continue to talk about Black feminism.
So, hi, my name is Elisabeth Susanna, and I will be talking about Black feminism, which is African feminism, which is fighting for women's rights, which is living in exile from a south to a not so progressive north, to a north that is not as equalitarian as I thought it would be, or as many African and African diaspora women thought it would be. Black and African feminisms are better talked in the plural, because they are many, diverse, and they also conflict among each other. I decided to focus my presentation on African feminism and to give examples of African feminists and African feminist organizations, movements and their fights, and also some main issues that African feminism deal with. Getting this inspiration and discussing the principles and challenges of African feminism is important to us here in Sweden, because African women come here and bring their own needs, their own issues, their own challenges with them. They bring their own experiences. Some of them keep their ties to their African homelands as well. Above all, Africa has been dehistoricized and essentialized. And what this means is that African women, we are responding in our own bodies to the myths created about Africa. in the diaspora as well. And these myths sometimes related to health issues like sexually transmitted diseases, to traditions, to gender relations, to how African women are treated in Africa, what our needs are, what our desires are. Often, too often, it is feminists with majoritarily white background and development workers called development experts who talk for us and who decide what our challenges are, decide how we are going to go about the problems that our communities face and that we as women face, and who also forcibly shape solutions to change both the African communities in Africa and the African communities in Sweden, well, in the diaspora in general and in Sweden, since we are talking about Sweden. So I would like to give some examples of African feminists and what contributions they have brought to the discussion. And one quite famous example is Thomas Sankara, revolutionary fighter and president of Burkina Faso, late president. In a speech he gave in 1987 in Ouagadougou for the International Women's Day, in an audience of African women, his speech was entitled "The Revolution Cannot Triumph Without the Emancipation of Women." And in this speech, he made clear that the African Revolution would not succeed to fight colonialism and to fight racism without women's oppression being erased. And so he equals slavery, for instance, with women's oppression in his speech. And he also, as I mentioned, said that revolution can only succeed if the system of oppression of women is erased as well. And I can give one example of one of his statements. Humankind first knew slavery with the advent of private property. Man, master of his slaves and of the land, became in addition the woman's master. This was the historic defeat of the female sex. It came about with the upheaval in the division of labor and as a result of new modes of production and a revolution in the means of production. In this way, paternal right replaced maternal right. Property was now handed down from father to son, rather than, as before, from the woman to her clan. The patriarchal family made its appearance, founded on the sole and personal property of the father, who had become head of the family. Within this family, the woman was oppressed. He also said that inequality can be done away with only by establishing a new society, where men and women will enjoy equal rights, resulting from an upheaval in the means of production and in all social relations. Thus, the status of women will improve only with the elimination of the system that exploits them. Another Black African feminist from Nigeria, Fumiliano Ransome Kuti, was a feminist and democratic socialist who organized an organization called the Abeokuta Women's Union, later known as Women's International Democratic Federation. And in these organizations, she helped foster the promotion of women's rights to education, employment, and political participation. One of the famous initiatives she led with other women was a protest against the king Alake and his house when women were going to be taxed. And they sang in Yoruba, Alake, for a long time you have used your penis as a mark of authority that you are our husband. Today, we shall reverse the order and use our vagina to play the role of husband. They have countered the official proclamation that everyone was going to be taxed, even though women did not have rights of political representation. After this, the king abdicated, and they went on to fight for women to have these political rights and also to have rights of property, in this case in Nigeria. Just the organization here. So, another African feminist became known as fashionable feminist because of her interesting choice of attire, and she became famous for some books, feminist books, that became kind of a canon within African feminism, like One Nigeria, Woman in Politics, Woman in Business and Leadership, and Emancipation for Women. This became a legacy as a politician, as a feminist politician in Nigeria. The African Feminist Forum is the last example I would like to give of an organization that fosters women's rights within a feminist framework. It was created in 2006 in Ghana, and it unites leaders from the African countries and the African diaspora who come from different backgrounds, both NGOs, academia, media, arts, politics, and philanthropy. And their mission is to promote transformative change to the status of African women and also define a specific African conceptualization of feminism. They have provided an umbrella for different African activists who otherwise have been working separately. They activate the feminist mantra, the personal is political, with several actions in the African political landscapes. I can give some examples. They have lobbied for the protocol on the rights of women in Africa. They have challenged homophobic legislation in Uganda and Nigeria. They have protected the victim in the then South African Deputy President Jacob Zuma rape trial, the trial where he was involved. They have campaigned for access to antiretroviral drugs in South Africa. And they have provided funds for grant-providing institutions that work mainly with women who want to continue their activities either as politicians or running their own NGOs, businesses, etc. They have also challenged Liberian President Charles Taylor and the rebel leaders to bring peace to Liberia, and they laid the groundwork for the first female African president to emerge in the subsequent fight. Another of the feminist credo that they go by is living lives of dignity. And one way they do this is by countering neo-colonial Western campaigns on the African woman's body. They have, for instance, fought and successfully defeated two campaigns, one from Canada and another one from New Zealand, that gave by the name of Undies for Africa, the Canadian one, and Knickers for Africa, the New Zealand one. These campaigns had rather totally unscientific claims that women in Africa had more sexually transmitted diseases because they did not wear underwears. And these campaigns claimed that by donating underwears to women in Africa, they would be able to limit the sexually transmitted diseases in women in Africa. And this organization has vigorously campaigned against it, and they have to close down this campaign. So they are quite vigilant with neo-colonial projects that are trying to control African women's bodies in this way. And the other feminist mantra they go by is walking the talk. And in this sense, they are interested in protecting the most vulnerable woman. They take the case to protect lesbians, transgender women, and women with disabilities in Africa. And another way of walking the talk is by doing cooperation, training, mentorship, education, and exchange with women all over the continent and in the African diaspora. They have held in 2012 a webinar about entitled Feminist Cyborgs, feminist activism on the internet and security, and to address this new wave of activism, online activism, and how African women can successfully be a part of this type of cyber activism. The work of these African feminists are inspiring to us, and they shape the framework of our own forthcoming initiatives. As we do not claim to be talking for every Black and African woman in Sweden, we think it is important that Black and African women have a face in public debates and can also recognize us and come to us with their challenges and needs. And in this case, to be attentive to what kind of challenges African women and African women of the diaspora have in Sweden is very important, and to be vigilant towards the possible and very frequent neocolonial attacks on our bodies. A few main issues that African feminists deals with: patriarchy, race, tradition, underdevelopment, sexuality, global feminism, and love. And to talk about the first one, patriarchy, Africa, like any other place in the world, is not exempt from patriarchal ideology, this historical, cultural, and psychological system that sustains that men are superior to women, and that this gives men the right to dominate women. African feminists are attentive to how this patriarchal logic and their supporters use law, tradition, customs, labor, ritual, force, language, education, to grant men control over women. It is quite clear that women who share the same racial, ethnical, and class background with men are still on a lower status in terms of economic and political power, at least since the advent of modernity and its introduction in Africa through colonial rule. African feminists think that African men and women benefit from actions that seek to create a more egalitarian and harmonious society for the future generations, and to be a stronger force in combating neocolonialism and the global challenges we face today. Now for race, obviously African feminism not only preoccupies itself with the gender dimensions of our oppression, but also with how histories of colonial and racialization that have set many spaces of Africa under the wings of foreign empires have influenced our lives up to today. And the idea is to rewrite these histories and to forge a language through which both African men and women can utilize to resist racism and its several phases. Tradition. This is a rather sensitive issue, since African traditions, or it is rather unpopular to criticize African traditions. African feminist thinkers, though, think that many of these traditions have maintained distinctions between men and women that have further exploitation of women. While African feminists do not want to erase traditions, to abandon them altogether, they do want to reflect and fight those that violate women in patriarchal relationships, witch hunting, lack of access to property and power. They can, of course, use certain traditions or transform them, keep them, transform them, taking away the violation and dehumanization of women. For example, in Guinea and in Mozambique, there has been several community initiatives to keep rituals of passage of women without the genital cutting. So by then keeping the importance of acknowledging the importance of changing phases in a woman's lives without the genital cutting. And the development for the fourth issue that African feminism deals with. One could say that Africa is considered one of the most underdeveloped continents in terms of people's access to basic amenities. And in this case, African feminists think this is connected with colonial and neo-colonial structures that shaped the imbalance and created a rich north and a poor south. Such structures operate in Africa through military intervention, through resource exploitation, NGO propaganda, unjustifiable death and trade practices. These and other practices of the power-hungry have devastating effects on African states' ability to cope with such factors as HIV and AIDS, women's sexual and maternal health, and also infrastructure development. And these neo-colonial structures also undermines gravely the building of an African consciousness that could rely on the idea that Africans can take care of themselves. This also sabotages the possible intercontinental trade. These structures also sabotage traditional forms of healthcare, national jurisdiction, indigenous agriculture, philosophical outlets. In this way, there is also a resistance within Africa and the African diaspora to shape a consciousness of gender equality, since it is claimed that gender equality is un-African and is a foreign product, or pursuing gender equality is un-African and a foreign product, or that, for instance, homosexuality is a sin or a colonial invention, when gender imbalances and homophobic laws were introduced in Africa firstly through colonial rule by law. They were not indigenous to Africa. Now for sexuality, this other issue, the question of female sexuality in all its manifestations and the state control and suppression thereof is in fact a central preoccupation of African feminists. To point out the obvious, homophobia and the persecution of African lesbians and African queer women by African states is a key issue in African feminist thought. And here, African feminists engage in pursuing an agenda that affirms African women's human rights of ownership of their own bodies. As for global feminism, African feminist thought has spent early decades fighting white feminism and fighting white feminists who want to curb African women's stories, experiences, and the way we tell our experiences. Nowadays, African feminists are more interested in working in solidarity, and they look for partnerships in Latin America and Asia. The many movements of feminists of color that have emerged in the second wave of feminism. And also acknowledging, of course, the contributions of white feminists who do not forget their privileged position and calling them out on this privileged position. For the last issue, love, despite being a vital aspect of our lives, love has been undervalued in a worldview of modernity that shapes much of our lives up to today. So when I talk modernity, I talk obviously the times when Industrial Revolution came to Europe and to the rest of the world through coloniality. African feminists want to challenge the white male norm in the academy and in other productions of knowledge by insisting in using all types of artistic forms to infuse theory and politics with emotion and passion, to decolonize and depatriarchalize minds, to offer an alternative view that seeks to establish love and justice at the same level of revolution and change. They can focus on, for instance, healing and reconciliation, or using the language of African womanhood as a global language that can transform societies worldwide, allowing the self-realization on all spheres, as women, as Black women, as sexual beings, as spiritual beings, psychological beings, and undermining like this, using this message of love and justice, undermining the micro and macro assaults that we face every day. Just wanted to, if I find paper, conclude that African women have reclaimed feminism since a long time ago. They have reshaped it, they have re-theorized it. And feminism is as African as anything else. We can discuss how to be attentive, not to reproduce white supremacist, colonial and capitalist thinking in the work of shaping ideas and actions for African context and the African diaspora where we are. We can discuss not to uncritically reproduce those colonial ideas that have been and are used to control African women and African women of the diaspora. This is one mission we humbly set ourselves to do. Yeah, I listed some suggested readings for those that are interested. Thank you. Yeah, and I give the floor to Victoria.
I'm just going to change PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I'm not recording.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see that so many of you could make it this beautiful Wednesday evening, despite the strike going on right now. But you are here, which means that there is a general and a genuine interest for the issue of Black feminism, which really is a very welcome. I mean, we are really happy to see that many of you are here to listen to us and to also to learn more about what SaFe can offer. My name is Victoria Kawesa, and I know many of you. I'm also a child of Café Pan-Afrika. And I would like to thank the organizers, Afro-Svenskarnas Riksförbund, and all the activists who visit Café Pan-Afrika and keeping it alive. And I've been away for such a long time, but I've been busy being a mother and everything else. But I'm really happy to be here. So thank you for inviting us and thank you for coming. I'll just say very shortly also that I'm a researcher, so my presentation might be quite theoretical in a way, and there is always the problem of having the balance between theory and practice and making theory understandable for those who are not familiar with this kind of theories. But I think that we have to start somewhere. And I think that it's important to have a kind of a theoretical discussion, presentation, so that for those who are interested, you can always go and read more. And also we have an hour afterwards, so if there are any concepts that I'm going to be talking quite fast, only 20 minutes, and I'll be using quite complicated concepts, and I know that even for me, a lot of concepts I have to go back and forth all the time to really understand what they mean. So please write down your questions and we will discuss it afterwards, okay? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes. So, first and foremost, I would like to say that I'm really happy that I'm part of SaFe, that I'm finally I've come out as a black feminist. I just want to say that really, I really discovered black feminist theory when I started studying, doing my PhD in gender at Linköping University. That's when I really started reading black feminist theories and understanding that it was bigger than I thought. The issue itself is larger than I thought. And it's the same thing with feminism. Feminism is larger than what we think. And how we perceive feminism in the daily speech is a very, very diverse, and we should even be talking about feminisms and not only about feminism, because there are so many different perspectives within feminism. So what I want to say also why I am a black feminist is because living in this white majoritarian society as a black person who also embodies a female body and growing up in a body that is both black and female is something that I thought I would have to decide between either fighting against racism or fighting against sexism. And it was very encouraging for me when I started reading black feminist theories that they were talking about me, about my body, about my experience, and that there was that it gave me a kind of a voice to also articulate my own experiences. And I think that is what black feminism can contribute to black women's lives, really, because it really puts things into a perspective whereby you don't have to choose between being black or being a woman. You can be both. And I think this is very, very important. And also I want to say that black feminism is also, within black feminism, it's also diverse. It depends if you're, you can be a black feminist socialist, you can be a black feminist radical, and you can be a radical feminist and a black feminist. So there are so many different perspectives. So I don't want to say that there is one right black feminist thinking. And also within SaFe, we have been discussing it, that many of us have different backgrounds, and we also, we address perhaps different issues depending on, our own location, our own experiences. So that's why, for me, talking about intersectionality, which is a very, it's a theoretical concept that comes from academia. It's a way for me to bring it back to, to make it more understandable in practice, but it's because I'm very interested in Black feminist theories. So, the concept of intersectionality, I think that probably you have all heard about it and you wonder, what is this concept? It's used in so many diverse different ways. So what I'm going to do now is to really explain the concept of intersectionality from the lens of a Black feminist perspective. And also, what is very important when it comes to Black feminism, and I know that Elizabeth talked about Black feminism from the, from an African perspective, from an African feminist perspective. And when I'm talking about Black feminism, I'm talking a lot about the influences from the US, from Black feminists from the US. They're the ones who really have done a lot of work around Black feminist thought and Black feminist ideas. But I just want to say that Black feminism has a lot of connections to other ideas about, social justice. And just as Elizabeth said before, I mean, Black feminism also means an African feminism. I mean, there is this global perspective around Black feminism, but it has also a lot of ties to social feminism, I mean, socialist ideas, Marxist ideas about class, and it has also a lot of connections to post-colonial theory. But what really distinguishes Black feminism from, for example, Marxism or socialist feminism or post-colonial feminism is that Black feminism also adds another dimension, which is to challenge feminism as a whites-only movement. Okay, so that is what it has. It challenges feminism as something only for white women. And when it comes to the notion of intersectionality, this notion is one of the most important contributions that Black feminists have done or brought to the feminist struggle. And this was in the beginning, during the 70s, a lot of feminist organizations and movements were very much, popping up everywhere, and women's liberation rights movements were very much on the agenda. And Black feminists who were within the white feminist organizations experienced a lot of marginalization because the only oppression that was important in these feminist organizations was gender, just being a female, living in a female body. And as a Black woman, you can't separate yourself from your race, and you can't separate yourself from your gender. So Black feminists had to find a way to express this interconnectedness of race and gender. And so the notion of intersectionality was coined by a Black feminist called Kimberly Crenshaw. And she's a prominent feminist law theorist within critical law studies. And I'm going. I mean, if you want to read more, I have a lot of references that you can write. And there you have a picture of Kimberly Crenshaw. So she's a lawyer and works within critical law studies. And she's the first person that coined the term intersectionality. So intersectionality really comes from the Black feminist movement. It's Black women that coined it from the beginning. But today, this concept has, it's used in so many ways that we don't really know, the background. Why is this concept important? And I just want to say also that, a lot of people say, yes, intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, but it was Angela White Davis that first spoke about this concept in her book called Women, Race and Class. But it is Crenshaw who gave the idea a name when she was discussing identity politics in her essay, Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women. But it's very important to know that, Crenshaw and Angela Davis were, the first black women who really were talking about the interconnectedness of race and gender as something that is not, you can't separate these two. So intersectionality really began by talking about not separating women and not forcing us to choose between fighting against racism or fighting against feminism. So when I talk about intersectionality through a black feminist lens, I'm mainly talking about how race and gender are interconnected. And there you have Angela Davis. I think many of you have heard about her. Yes. But then, these issues, talking about the interconnectedness of women, of black women's positions as, being racialized and gendered, this is not something that was new. I mean, black women know that from the start. We know that we are both. And a lot of, already in 1851, this issue was discussed. And one of the first persons that talked about the interconnectedness of race and gender was a very famous person that I really like a lot. Her name is Sojourner Truth. And she was born into slavery in New York State. And her parents were both enslaved Africans from Ghana and Guinea. And after gaining her freedom in 1827, she became a well-known anti-slavery speaker. And her most famous speech is called, "Ain't I a Woman?" And this was delivered at the Women's Convention in May 1851. And the issue that she was speaking about is the same issue that we are speaking about today. Black women trying or fighting to have a space in the feminist or the women's movements, and saying that we are also women, and we women shouldn't the feminist movement or the women's movement fight for our rights as racialized women. The challenge was that white feminists, had defined feminism as the fight against a common oppression, that there was only one kind of oppression, and that was patriarchy. That was the fight. That was to reinstate women as equal to men. It was the subordination of women that was the main point, and this idea that all women are just have one kind of oppression that they share. This is this is what intersectionality really tried to challenge by saying that no, we should rethink about this notion of of a common oppression, because then we kind of think that all women we say that all women in the whole world are first and foremost only women, and then secondly you can be everything else. You can be black, you can have another religion, that they are in second place. But by speaking about intersectionality, black women was saying we should probably talk about difference instead. Instead of talking about a common oppression, we should talk about difference among women. And this was a way of creating a space to speak about the differences that we have, and to talk about the racial relationships that are always embedded in all kind of social justice movements. And this notion of difference is very much connected to intersectionality. So when when I talk about difference, you can you think about intersectionality as part of as part of this, the notion of difference, because it really shows that if we don't talk about the differences between us, then we are always, some people are going to be excluded. We'll be fighting for some people's rights, but some people will always be excluded from the fight. And there I have Bell Hooks, who is also a very prominent feminist, who has made this argument strongly that difference is important to speak about among women. And she's one of the one of the most famous critiques. She's one of the most famous black feminists that has critiqued this idea of all women can unite under one umbrella of a common oppression. And Bell Hooks wrote her first book when she was only 18 years old, and it was called Entire Woman. And it was, the title was based on Sojourner Truth's speech. So what Bell Hooks was saying is that this idea of a common oppression is very simplistic and very narrow, because what it says is that we can only build sisterhood and equality by not recognizing our differences. And that, if we do this, then what will happen is that the power structures that are already built into the relationships will still stay intact. And so what black feminists suggested was that when we talk about difference, then we talk about difference of experiences. Okay, that we should talk about our experiences, our difference of experiences, and that this difference of experiences are important to articulate, especially among black women. And Patricia Hill Collins, she, I can show you a picture of her. There she is. She was here in Stockholm last year, in Uppsala. And she's also one of the prominent black feminists. And she has written a book called Black Feminist Thought. Please, can somebody look at the time for me, because I can speak forever. That's the problem. Patricia Hill Collins, she has been for a long time in the academia, and she's one of those who really try to challenge the idea that working with gender and working with feminism in the academia only means not talking about experience as a source of knowledge. And this is something that is very that has excluded a lot of women who come from, who have a class black background that is not middle class, or women who don't have an academic background. It has been very difficult to talk about those experiences without these experiences being seen as just politics. So she was saying that we have to base knowledge on our experiences, and that these experiences that we have will also show the differences that we have between us. And also talking about difference among women is Chandra Mohanty, and she is a post-colonial feminist, and she wrote a book called Under Western Eyes, and she critiqued Western feminists for drawing knowledge from the experiences of women in the third world, and making that knowledge relevant. What she means is that Western feminists go to the third world and say that we're going to liberate third world women, and we want to learn about their experiences and their lives, and then they write a lot of knowledge about this. But this knowledge is really based on, is based on white women's experiences and their own viewpoints of the other. So instead of creating knowledge that can be, developing for all women, it was actually knowledge that reinstated the white woman as the knower, the one who has the knowledge, and the third world women as the objects of study. So So she's one of, and this is what post-colonial feminism is trying to, to talk about, to connect the global, this whole idea of to have a global feminism or this universal sisterhood that many Western feminists have tried to do, saying that we can have a global sisterhood, all of us, as long as we are women. Post-colonial feminism critiques this and say, as a white feminist, you can't leave your position as a, you can't forget about your position as a privileged, your privileged position while you are in the third world. If you don't take into account that power structure, that power hierarchy between you as a Western white feminist, when you are addressing issues of third world women, if you don't take into account that inequality in the relationship, then what you're doing is really just reproducing knowledge that won't liberate women in the third world. So what Chandra Mohanty was saying is that global feminism as a universal sisterhood became a way to liberate the others into what they, white women, perceived as feminism, constructing the others as merely a reflection of the Western feminist burden, and constructing the third world woman as merely an object of knowledge. You see, and this is really where we are still in this state. We are still in a state whereby white feminists go to the third world and try to save third world women. So third world women become a kind of the burden for Western women, that need to be saved. And there you have Chandra Mohanty, and she's from India, and her article Under Western Eyes is very, 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 very good if you want to read that one. So what we're talking about now is the politics of difference. Okay? The politics of difference is to talk about differences among ourselves. Differences among black people, differences among women, and to really recognize that we, even if we have, the same kind of goal, we have to recognize the differences, otherwise some people are going to be excluded. And this is very important. And I can also say that, for example, here in Sweden, talking about difference, or talking about politics of difference is still very problematic. Because Sweden is very much influenced, like all other Western societies, by something called the Enlightenment tradition. And this Enlightenment tradition, thinks of equality as something that must be expressed in universal terms, like equality for everybody. Everybody should have the same equality, that there are no differences between us, there are no differences among persons or among groups. And that if there are differences, then, that might be, purely, accidental, or that is something that you should solve, privately, but the laws and the state, the laws that are made for us to achieve equality, they should be expressed in very general terms. So that's why we have in Sweden, problems in having specific laws that address specific problems for specific people, right? I mean, we still have that problem. You can't say that, we need a law that we want to combat violence against black people, and we should really have measures, we should introduce measures to work against violence against black people. I mean, that wouldn't be possible, because, they would say we have already laws, that should protect you, and you can't demand rights based on, your group identity. So I have to move on, because I'm feeling that everybody's like, that is the problem of being last. Nobody has time to listen. But anyway, I want to say also that in Sweden we have other post-colonial thinkers. We have Diana Molinari, we have De Loreas, and they really critique this way of not looking at the power inequalities that are present in our lives, because you can't say that you want equality for everybody when the conditions are based on inequality, right? I mean, equality for everyone is not possible as long as the conditions that we live under are not equal. It's not possible to achieve equal equality then. So you can read more about that. Diana Molinari, they have written a lot of texts about the situation in Sweden. So, back to this idea of difference, I know that also within the Black movement, when we talk about Black feminism, it can be a challenge because I know that we are living in a world in a world whereby it's still this kind of a colonial state that we're living in. It's still we are living under racist structures. And whereby race is, there are many ways of trying. I mean, there are lots of, there's pressure trying to erase race as an issue, and I know that we as Black people, all of you who are here, and also those who are not Black, but also who are engaged in the anti-racist movement, that we are trying to talk about race as something important. But at the same time, as Black feminists, when we bring in the intersection of gender and race, it's a way of talking about the problems that we have of not seeing the differences in our experiences, because racism affects us differently depending on our bodies, if we're living in a Black female body or not. Racism affects us differently, and I know that the challenge is to have a movement whereby you're trying to have a unified struggle, and at the same time also recognizing differences among ourselves. That is a challenge for all movements, not only the Black movement. It's a challenge for the feminist movement, and as I've already shown, I mean, this was a challenge for Black feminists in the beginning of the 80s, trying to talk about difference between feminist movements. And I think that it's important to try to talk about these issues so that we can find ways of becoming even stronger. And I can just say that there are a lot of white feminists who were very angry with Black feminists talking about differences among women, and they really. One of them is called Martha Feynman, and she said that this critique from Black feminists, it just causes this disunity within the feminist movement, and that what it does is it reveals internal struggles, and it destroys and threatens the dream of sisterhood, and it just causes a lot of fragmentation. And these are the same kind of arguments that are also used in the Black movement, that Black feminists critique, and it is a kind of it can distract or cause disunity or cause fractions within the Black movement. So I mean, it's the same kind of arguments. Yeah, I think I will actually end there because I can talk forever, but I can see, I don't want you to. I mean, we can discuss this more during the discussion, right? Yes, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, Elisabeth och Karin. Så vad vi gör nu, det är att vi som vanligt tar en 10 minuters paus. Och då kan ni förfriska er, köpa någonting att dricka, köpa en soppa, mätta er, eller bara